What I want to do now is change the trajectory of where we are as a people for the future. I want to be able to start to understand and be able to shift and help others communicate and find their way into an industry that doesn't always or hasn't always welcomed them into it.
Benvenuti a Ciao Bella. I'm your host, Erica Firpo. For the past 20 years, I've made my home in Rome, where I've worked as a journalist contributing to publications including Afar, Washington Post, Lonely Planet, and Travel and Leisure. I love sharing the stories of Italy's pioneering creators, and I'm bringing these stories directly to you on Ciao Bella. Every week, I'm joined by contemporary artists, heritage artisans, designers, culinary experts, innovative aesthetes, and more. At the crossroads of evolution and tradition, the past and the future, they are working and creating to define and redefine 21st century Italy. Join me as we see Italy through their eyes. A regular face in Vogue and women's wear daily, knitwear designer Edward Buchanan has become an internationally recognized visionary in the high fashion world and a thought leader for diversity in the industry. The designer and founder of knitwear label Sansovino 6 began his career straight out of Parsons School of Design when he moved to Italy to work with Bottega Veneta. And since then, he's full-time in Milan. Edward's over 30-year career includes Italian houses like Giorgio Armani, Bottega Veneta, Max Mara, and of course Sansovino 6. He is a self-described omnivore who curates the convergence of catwalk and sidewalk, street and elite, politics and party, and of course culture. And he is co-founder of We Are Made in Italy, advocating for Black and brown creatives in the fashion industry, and more. Listen up to hear Edward's story. Hey, welcome back to Ciao Bella. Today I'm sitting in the studio with Edward Buchanan, the creative force behind Sansovino 6, or Sansovino 6.
Sansovino 6, Sansovino 6, whatever we want to call it.
See, I was about to speak in Italian, a super artistic, I don't know, you're a creative director, you've had a lot of different, I wouldn't even call them titles, like you're a big 360 in the world of art and fashion.
I wear many hats.
Yeah.
I wear many hats.
And you've been in Milan, you said, for 25 years?
25 years.
So
25 years based, more or less based, but going back and forth in the beginning stages.
And back and forth, just tell me, how does a guy from Ohio come to Milan?
Go stepping back further. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I went to school in Columbus, Ohio. So from Cleveland, I moved to Columbus to study. That was my first college. I graduated in Cleveland, and I didn't even know what fashion design was, for that matter. I think this, we're talking about in the 80s, dating myself here. But I went to college for fine art and illustration. I was always a great illustrator. I grew up in an artistic family. My mother's a pianist. My family are musicians. And so I knew that I wanted to be an artist. I was already in high school. I was drawing, and there was like expression. But fashion came nowhere near that conversation. I didn't know, that there was a possibility of actually having a career in that. I just knew that I was somewhere in the arts. So at Columbus College of Art and Design, my degree was in fashion illustration and retail advertising, which is a strange category in the degree that they put you in, but they didn't know where to put these people who didn't know what they wanted to be, but needed to get a degree. I'd already started going back and forth to New York because I had a friend that I was studying with who was a graffiti artist, and he was living in New York. So I knew that was probably the next place that I wanted to be. New York was in the 90s. It was the city to be in for me, or at least I thought. And then I arrived in New York City, and what I did in order to get there, I was doing visual merchandising. So I was a window display person, and that was like, I think in the end of the 80s, early part of the 90s, that was a big job because display and visual was like a big thing for large scale companies and even small scale companies.
Well, I remember that was like the height of or the rise of Simon Doonan. Remember?
Exactly.
The whole Barney's window was like it.
Exactly. So that was the situation, and so window display was the thing, and it was it was also the occupation for artists that wanted to make money but then do something on the side. So you were able to use your artistic expression in doing window display, because window display wasn't just dressing mannequins in the clothing, it was everything that surrounded it. So it was like building up these environments within the stores inside and also outside, meaning the windows. So I was working for the Gap, and to make money to go pay for school. I worked at the Gap. I worked at Benetton. It was like I was retail, working in fashion retail, and that kind of gave me the hint or the idea that fashion was something that I was interested in. I was less interested, I would say, in what fashion was, and more curious about how people dress themselves. So it was really a personality thing.
Oh, interesting.
And I asked my boss at the Gap if she could put me in touch with the people in windows in New York City to get a transfer from Ohio to New York City. And so we set up the appointment. I met with Lisa Abbey, who was the director at that time, and I got a transfer, and I moved to New York with $50 in my pocket. I was like couch surfing, for the first period, and I landed there. I hadn't thought about school again until after maybe 6 months. I was working.
And you were doing window design at the Gap in Manhattan?
It's a funny story. I was doing window display at the Gap in Manhattan, and they have districts. I was Upper East Side. It was a zone and an area that was completely like on the other side of town for me. I was living in the East Village. Okay, and so it familiarized me with environment and also status and all of those things. It was a real lesson in finding my pace in New York City, but it served. And so I was working on the Upper East Side. There were a lot of stores at the time. Gap had like stores on every block. I don't know if you remember it. Like Gap was like.
I had friends that lived at like 80th and Lex at the time, so I remember like the mid 90s.
Yeah.
I also remember being like kind of quiet too.
It was like, it was the jeans house, it's where you went to get your jeans and so your basics. So while I was in the window at the Gap, so this is like 4 or 5 months into arriving in New York City, this guy is like knocking on the window, and he's like, come here. And he said, oh, I work for Giorgio Armani, and I'm recruiting for a new project that we're going to be opening up. So this was in the 90s. So the first store for Giorgio Armani Exchange opened in 1991. And so they were recruiting for this store, and they said, I'd like you to come in for an interview. Just me in the window, okay? This is a New York story. This is how it happens in New York, these kind of like, mishaps turn into, blossom into careers. So I met with Giorgio Armani, and I started working with Giorgio Armani. So it was
doing windows?
Doing window display, visual merchandising. So it was in showrooms. I was doing Black Label. I was doing Emporio.
All because you were in a window in the Gap.
Because I was in a window in the Gap. And then, when I met with them for visual merchandising, of course, I had a portfolio, and they knew that I had an artistic background and an eye. So, and I talked a good game. So I ended up being hired by Giorgio Armani, and I was hired by Giorgio Armani full time for Emporio, Emporio Armani, Giorgio Armani Black Label showrooms, and then Armani Exchange, which is the new project that they were launching at the time. And so I started working full time there, and I knew I wasn't finished with education. So I put together a portfolio. I said, I'm going to go to Parsons. I'm going to go to Parsons because it's the best. They have portfolio days, so I went to present my portfolio. And I remember going in there and in the admissions office, and I showed the portfolio. And then the guy gets up and he carries the portfolio back, and they go back and forth. I was like, what the hell's going on here? And it was because I was a great illustrator, and in Ohio, the foundation for me was always of art in general was always color and composition and all of those things, and that's why I think it was important, and it served the work that I do today to not jump directly into fashion design. I wanted a 360 kind of education in the process of history and color and everything that surrounded the world. So by the time that I got to Parsons, and I didn't know really anything about a croquis or designing or creating actually a garment, they accepted me, and they gave me a scholarship, and I entered into Parsons as a sophomore. So the foundation was over, so I just started right into design, and I was going to school full time and also working full time. So it was a funny period because I was like showing up to like draping class wearing like Black Label Armani
Sure, there were many people that were doing
At
that.
school, which is ironic because my beginning story in New York. Of course, you arrive in New York and you struggle. I didn't come from a family of money that really supported that, so everything that I had to do was on my own. The support was in other ways. It was in love and it was encouragement, but it wasn't financial. So
How did your peers feel? Like you walking into Parsons second year, like enrolling into second year, and then also being like, oh, I gotta go to work at Armani,
yeah,
where I'm doing the visual design, like the
I
visual
know it was
displays.
kind of badass. I in the '90s in that period, New York was a great place for me. I worked really hard, but I had a really kind of privileged status in being in school because normally being in school, and that's related to also already having done school.
Right.
So all of that angst and partying and all that stuff,
You got that out of the way.
I got it out of the way. I was there, like I knew that I wanted to be a student, and I knew I wanted to be focused, and I was already working. So I was already in essence. I could have continued as a visual merchandiser and made a big career out of visual display and gone on to do other things, but I knew that was only just touching the edge, as I said before, of really what I wanted to do. But I had a great set of friends, and Parsons came with a history in design at the time, and I knew what I was up against, but I worked really hard. I have to say that it was exhausting. I was tired. I was always good at working in the last minute, even if I was formulating the ideas in my head, and then when I hit the paper,
Gemini?
I'm a Gemini.
Okay, so Gemini, you're good at thinking about it and then executing.
Exactly, and just put it. It's there was a lot of well, there had to be a lot of somehow procrastination in that period. I remember specifically because I loved I loved design. I still love design. I love design. I love the process of design, and I loved somehow projecting, which is a part of the design process. Um, at the same time, it was important that I gave 1,000% at work. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. And that period was chaotic and exciting because I was at the same time that I was doing window display. Because when I started going to Parsons, I was a great illustrator. So a lot of the companies that were collaborating and working with Parsons wanted me to illustrate for them. So I was doing.
When you say illustrate for them, it was like fashion illustration?
Fashion illustrations, yeah.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. So
I feel like you must have been like on some serious adrenaline. Because
when you're in your 20s, you know what that's like. When you're in your 20s, you just want to do more and more and more and more and more.
Yeah.
And you're in the city that just kind of offers you all of those possibilities. And it was a very different time. So we weren't, spending 90% of our time on the phone. We were doing shit. And so I was, at the same time, I was going out at night. It was just a period of immense inspiration and movement and excitement. It was crazy. It was like really, it was a beautiful period.
Edward was getting a lot done and enjoying his time. His professional momentum was moving fast, so I asked him why he decided to leave.
So I finished Parsons, and what I thought was, well, yeah, I graduated with honors. It was awarded a silver thimble and a gold thimble, and then I exited. And my mentor when I was there was a designer named Gordon Henderson. Gordon Henderson is an American designer, and he had his own label, Gordon Henderson, also But Gordon. He was one of my critics, and then my other critic was Isaac Mizrahi.
Oh, wow.
And I finished, and Gordon, who also happened to be an African American designer, kind of put me in front of everyone, and he kind of ushered me into a lot of these companies. So I mean, when I say ushered me in, he made an appointment with Calvin, the Calvin Klein, because he used to work at Calvin Klein. So I met with Calvin, I met with Donna, I met with Ralph, I met with all of these people, and no one was biting. I would send my portfolio, and they would be like, "Oh, this guy's really good, really interesting. Come on in." Nothing was biting. The only bite I got, which was really funny, is that they were looking for an intern at Perry Ellis, and this was the years that Marc Jacobs was at Perry Ellis. So I went in, I met with Mark and I met with Robert, who was his assistant at that time, and they loved my drawings and they were like, "Oh, this guy's good. Let's let's give you an internship." It was right in the same season that the Grunge collection was being done by Marc Jacobs, and he ended up getting fired after that.
Right.
And I ended up not doing the internship. And so I was in the position, an interesting position, that I wanted to shift into design. So my idea was to get an internship, continue working at Giorgio Armani, and do them both at the same time, like I did school. So I was able to make money, but I was obviously able to start working, and the work part wasn't necessarily happening. And I'll come back to that because it makes sense now to me. But what ended up happening is that my friend Rodney Patterson was doing visual merchandising at Bottega Veneta. And Bottega Veneta at that time was a family-owned business. It was a family, the Moltedo family, which are from Vicenza, that family. And so he was doing windows for them because, in window display, you have a community of people. He happened to be a very good friend of mine and still is to this day. He told them about me and he said, "Oh, I got you a meeting with the Moltedo family from Bottega Veneta." What is it? 95 Bottega Veneta. I had no freaking clue of what it was. I wasn't interested. My mind was like elsewhere. I was Belgium. I was like Helmut Lang and Andy de Muster. It was like,
you were like high fashion, and they were. Yeah. I mean, I would just think leather and bags at
exactly,
the time, right?
Exactly. So it was like, what am I going to do there? And Bottega Veneta at the time, and one of the details that I noticed is that the shelves were rolling up. It was in a period where Bottega Veneta really wasn't about Bottega Veneta. So I looked around, I saw the thing, and then when I went to them, I wanted to go with a project in hand. And because I knew, the preface was that Bottega Veneta had only done accessories. So Intrecciato handbags, shoes, it was an accessories business. They built the business in the 70s. The first store was on Madison Avenue. Laura Moltedo was the receptionist at the factory, Andy Warhol's factory. So there was a history. I learned all these little points about the company. Yeah. I learned that. I learned that after. Interesting detail. Yeah, I learned that after. And so I said, okay, let me create this little capsule of what I think, and I wasn't. It wasn't stressful. I was working. I had a job. I had money in the bank. So I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, as you do when you're young. And so I was in an aggressive approach to what Bottega Veneta could be. And I approached it in creating this capsule as an accessory to the accessories. And it was probably like 15 or 20 designs and a presentation. And I met with them and we talked for hours. She was so great and so responsive. And after that meeting, 3 weeks later, I was flying to Vicenza. So they hired me, and they hired me green. They hired me with no luxury experience. They hired me, here I am, this, Black American guy that they're hiring to start an apparel business for a company in Italy. I don't speak the language.
In Vicenza, by the way.
In Vicenza, in Bastia, even.
What was your attitude towards that change? Do you feel now like you knew at the time what you were getting yourself into?
When you're young, you don't even consider the pressure of what that means, or you're just like, okay, I'm going to go to Europe, So I fly to Vicenza, I fly to Venice. And when I fly to Venice, the very first trip, I get out of the airplane and, I have my bags. And at that time I had long dreadlocks. I was probably dressed similar to how I am today, a sweatshirt and some jeans or something on. And they stopped me. They stopped me at the exit and the customs. And they were like, "Where are you going?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to start work." Explaining the whole situation. And they said, "Do you have drugs?" And I was like, "No, I don't even smoke cigarettes." In that time I didn't smoke until I arrived in Italy. And they said, "Well, if you have drugs, just give them to us." And I was like, "I don't have drugs." So they took me in the back and they strip searched me. They cavity searched me.
In Venice.
In Venice airport. and I had to end up calling someone from Bottega Veneta to come and, just like kind of work through this paperwork of what this meant. And so 360, that kind of was the preface of knowing that I was entering into a place and a life where what maybe I was used to as an American living in a city which was super multicultural and diverse, into an environment where someone that looked like me um, wasn't like the others. That was just the first beginning stages. And when I reflect on that, when I think back to that period, that was my real like change moment when I arrived there. So I started. Vicenza is a very interesting city because there's an American base there. There were a lot of Americans living in Vicenza. The beginning stages of work was really, really difficult because I didn't know any factories. I didn't know the language. I had to no fear. I really had to kind of like jump, you know, feet first in the situation and start to figure it out.
I mean, that's like a big, that's like a big drop into a whole, I mean, a completely other world. And then, it's not, again, like you're saying, it's not Milan because it was not, and even Milan at that time, by the way,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, but I want you to
Yeah.
tell me more of your story.
Yeah.
Because even Milan in the 90s is not Milan that you see today.
Absolutely. Absolutely not.
I can only imagine what it must have been like to have this nice welcome from the Venetians at the airport and then going into this place.
When you find yourself in a space or an environment where there the mystery and you don't necessarily understand something that's not you or that you're not accustomed to. And that was how I viewed that first moment. It was like, where's this guy going? He's landing in Venice and he's going to Vicenza. He has dreadlocks. We don't see people that look like this. In Italy at the time, and even in Milan for that matter at the time, if you were black and brown, you or sold Prada bags on the street, or you worked in fashion. And the in-between didn't exist in the middle stages.
I mean, that is...
It's extreme.
Yeah.
Is extreme. So I remember I didn't have my first, I didn't see my first black taxi driver in Italy, for many years after. And so in official spaces, and it still exists today, in official spaces like government spaces, like post offices and things like that, you really don't see black and brown people working within those spaces.
No,
you see cleaners, you see, the hired help. So I knew these would be challenges, and so I was somehow mentally prepared to battle and push through. But I learned a lot more in the kind of in an organic way by facing them head on. When I moved to Milan, there were other things that were, yes, I found myself working in a space at a very high level. Where I was one of the only ones. There were others that existed in the space. There was Lawrence Steele, and there was Warren, who was at Jill Sander. There were others that were working in the space. So we had kind of a community. I had a community of people that I knew, but still I felt like I was really the only one in that space. The beauty of that period was I was working, yes, under an enormous amount of pressure because the first few seasons was like really difficult because I'm sure they were thinking, why did we hire this guy? But at the same time, I was like working so hard, and we built up the structure and the retail operation and the wholesale operation of the apparel business for Bottega Veneta. I was there for almost 7 years, and the last year that I was there was when actually Gucci Group, which it was called at that moment, actually purchased Bottega Veneta. And so it is, yeah, I'm a part of the history of that company, and it was a great period, and it prepared me. It was my school in luxury goods. It was my school in business. It was my school, and because it was a family-owned business, I touched everything. I saw everything. So, I always think that young people, when they find themselves in those environments, you have to kind of be a sponge and you have to suck it all up.
Take it all in.
Yeah, it prepared me for many things.
When did you start Sansevino 6?
Sansevino 6 came much later. When I left Bottega Veneta, I started a collection with the accessories director from Bottega Veneta. Her name was Manuela Morin. She was also American, Italian American. We started Le Flèche. Le Flèche was a collective that we did, and it was like very highbrow, like Victorian hip hop. You know, we were working with the best factories. It was like extreme luxury, but it was creative luxury, and it was beautiful to start this project because it was it had no history. You know, after working for so many years for a company that had a history, essentially, so you were interpreting what you thought that history should be for the future, whereas we were starting a project based on luxury that had no history, and also in that period in Milan, it didn't exist, those types of small independent companies. So
really?
Yeah, it didn't really exist, you know. Everything was establishment in Italy.
Ah.
You know, there was still the Gucci's and the Pradas and the Ferragamos and all of those things, and so young design, there wasn't awards that were or collectives that were created for young designers. So we were kind of on our own, and that lasted about 5 years, and we reached a high, but we were not structured business wise. It was a self-financed business. The press was amazing. We were in the best stores in the world, but we needed more. You know, we needed more. Not preparation. We needed more support in order to make that thing go forward. So, but that was the period in which I did La Flèche. I wasn't a technician, a knitwear technician, but it was always a part of what I did, and maybe that comes from the casual aspects of what I think clothing is, and being an American. I always somehow drifted towards knitwear and comfort, and the idea of comfort. I wanted to learn more about it. And incidentally, one of the first factories that I met, actually the first factory that I met with to start Bottega Veneta, was a knitwear factory. And that knitwear factory was the factory that I worked out throughout the course of my career.
Oh, wow. Now, yeah. I know that historically there's a lot of knitwear factories in Prato.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is it also, I think the two hubs are like Prato and then outside of Milan, is that correct?
It's kind of all over the place. Yes, there's a lot of knitwear factories in Prato. I work with knitwear factories in Reggio Emilia and in still Veneto, Imola. You know, they're all over the place. There weren't very many in Milan Center, and the one that I found that I was in Milan that I started to work with was because of out of convenience. Our offices were here, so I was like, oh, let's do it. And they ended up working with me, you know, throughout the entire period. So that factory. Silvana, when I started working with her, it was kind of an exchange for me because yes, she was building, you know, the collection that I was creating for Bottega Veneta. She was somehow, it was an exchange of my creative process with her technical skills, and it was a medium that I just kind of fell in love with. I'm constantly in school, still to this day. So I started consulting. I did the Flèche. It was very high profile, Le Flèche, because it was just outrageous. It was just this beautiful, crazy, outrageous things that, you know, there was a lot of celebrity involved. We were dressing Cher and all of these things, you know, in the 90s. And we did some things for Jennifer Lopez, which was for that movie Made in Manhattan.
Yes, and
right?
I believe that's MAID.
Exactly. And so after that, I got contacted by Jennifer Lopez, who apparently liked the things that she was wearing, and they called the office and said, we want you to meet with them. And then I was in New York, and I met with Jennifer, and she had a line called J-Lo, which is, you know, the jeans and the t-shirts. Aspirational.
I was a big J-Lo fan.
Okay, aspirational. And then there was a line called Sweet Face, and they were looking for a consultant for Sweet Face. They were doing this big, huge show. They wanted someone with luxury experience. And then I ended up working with a lot of celebrities in that period. I worked with Sean Combs. I did some things for Iman. And these were all product-based collections. Sean Puff Daddy had Sean John. And so I worked on his 10 years anniversary show. What did I bring to that? I had already luxury experience. I had Italian manufacturing experience. I knew how to speak to the factories. I spoke Italian at that point, so there was an advantage to.
Can I ask though, where like that was actually in the back of my head, I wanted to ask you what the biggest difference was, or I wanted to ask you, these are American celebrity brands. Are they sourcing from Italy or?
Not all. A lot of them were sourcing in Asia at that time. A lot of the work, especially in the knitwear sector, had gone to Asia because of price point and also technique. But they wanted Italian manufacturing. That was like the thing to have. If you had the connect there and you had someone that could actually work with the factory, they wanted to have those things that were like crafted in the center of the fashion meccas. And so that was something that I brought to the table. And also once you start working in that world, I think that they have confidence and know that you can handle that situation. I've never jumped into those situations thinking that I have something to gain from them. For me, it was a job, and I respect the space. I respect the work that they do. I respect their celebrity, but I'm a designer. I'm a designer's designer, and so you want me to design? We got something to do. I'm not chasing them down for something else. So we got along really well. I learned so much working with Sean, with Puff. He can sell you an empty trash bag. He was very pivotal in that moment in knowing that yes, I wanted to turn back to Italy, and he encouraged that. But I also learned a really different way of thinking. In the same way, many years later, that I learned a lot working with Virgil, and not just because they're both African American designers, but in the process and knowing the consumer that they're talking to, directing the consumer, but at the same time listening to the consumer, and that makes a big difference in product development. And so I did all of that, and then I was like, bye, I'm going back to Italy. And when I came back to Italy, I was like, see ya.
Edward headed back to Italy, and that was when he started working on Sansovino 6. I was curious as to what catalyzed that decision, so I asked him what the inspiration was behind it.
I started Sansovino 6 because the factory that I originally started working with, that I was telling you about, Silvana, was still in Milano, and that was the period when all of the Italian manufacturers were starting to have problems because everyone was going to Asia, knitwear and fabric sourcing and everything. So they were losing a lot of business. And so I went back to this factory. She was one of the last factories that were here in Milan, and she had, she's like my second mother, Silvana. So I was like, let's do something so that we can give you kind of a display, to show the possibilities of what you can do. As outlandish as it may be, let's create a collection. It doesn't have to be a collection that we're necessarily going to sell, but let's create something. I thought in that way because, for me, it was going to be a window display, because when you create something and people can see it, then they can say, oh, yeah, this is what they can do, and then we can start working with them based on the creations of what they do. So I came back and I said the only stipulation in actually doing this is that you just let me do what the fuck I need to do, and don't question me about the creative process, because there's a method to the madness, and we're gonna get you some business, right? After all that I've done and all the spaces that I was in, I wanted to do something that was quite personal. So I sent out emails to a lot of friends, whether they be doctors or whether they be technicians or whether they be fashion designers or stylists. And I asked them two questions. I said, what is it that you have in your wardrobe that you covet and can't live without? And what is it that you don't have that you would really need in your wardrobe? And I got back various things. I got back jeans, perfect white shirt, perfect parka, I got back all of these things. And then I lined them up and I chose 6 pieces. Sansovino 6. Sansovino 6. Sansovino 6 was actually the address of the factory, which made sense, but I based it on the number. 6 pieces, 6 perfect pieces.
And jeans.
And I built those 6 pieces in fully fashioned knitwear. So if it was a parka, there was a parka, there was a white shirt, there was jeans, there was a T-shirt, and there was Giro Collo. There was a crew neck sweater, and so jeans, perfect white shirt, and parka were things that were made in woven material. So you're normally made in cotton, but it's a completely different structure. So the challenge and the interesting challenge for me was to start to develop, how do you create the perfect white shirt in knitwear that has the same qualities of poplin, but is not a poplin, or how do you develop jeans, and this was before diesel, by the way. How do you develop knitted jeans so you have the same quality as wearing a jean, you have the same comfort, but it actually looks like jeans?
Oh.
So how do you create the perfect parka, which we consider military parka, in green cotton that's damaged and worn in? You know, so it was a the work process was very interesting for me because I started from local ideas, and I wanted to translate those local ideas into, you know, what became the DNA of the brand. And so, you know, the jeans took several seasons to develop, but when we launched it, it was like outrageous. And when we launched it, that was the thing that really took off. And it was, you know, Sansovino 6 does knitted jeans, and we did t-shirts, and we did jeans, we did jean skirts. And it looks like, when you don't touch it, it looks like jeans. And then you put it on, and it's almost like you're wearing, you know, a sweatsuit.
I'm a jeans freak.
Yeah.
So you're speaking to the choir here.
I don't have to create a collection every season. I can do projects for people. I can do projects for companies. Last season, I did a project with Neiman Marcus, designed specific pieces for Neiman Marcus. We launched. It was like direct to consumer. I did.
Does that come with a label like Sansovino 6 for Neiman Marcus? It
just says Sansovino 6.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. It's my brand. So it's in a great place right now because I can guide it where I want to guide it to. When I started showing, I wanted to show a message. It was always about a message. The message was about community, Sansovino 6, because my collaborators were always just a lot of people that work closely to me. Whenever I do shows, it's not a runway show for that matter. It's always a story, it's storytelling.
But this goes back to your foundations, like you were saying.
As I was saying, it all turns back.
Yeah.
So I create this kind of, you know, multi-dimensional world where, yes, the apparel is the centerpiece, but there's a lot of other things that are happening around it. And so you know, Stephen Galloway was the principal dancer for the Frankfurt Ballet. He's now a movement director. He coined the term movement director that I collaborated with. Deborah Shaw, famous model from the 90s, who I also ended up working with, who also is a singer. I started working with her. David Blank is a young Afro-Italian that lives here in Milan, super talented. I started working with him. So there's always, you know, I'm touching a lot of these different spaces. And then when I say message, the message for me is what have I learned, and how can we communicate that so that the others can use that also as their message. And so within the scale of this, I created, you know, in the beginning stages of the election of Donald Trump, I remember thinking, I can't complain about what's happening without actively attempting to offer an idea or an inspiring thought to what's happening around us. So I was like, I'm going to create messages, and I created these 3 message scarves, and I financed the whole project. And there were 3 messages. There was resist, there was wake up for freedom, and there was we're all migrants. And so I created these 3 scarves, and I gave them out. I completely gave them out in different cities to different people. And it wasn't really about influencers, it was about people. And it didn't, you know, I didn't ask or require you to do anything, I wanted you to have the scarves, and I wanted you to understand what that word meant to you, because resist to you might mean something else. Resist to me might mean a completely other thing. But the only thing that I asked is that for the people that received the scarves, if they could create a message on social media saying what that word means to them. And that was the start of a lot of things that existed with Sansevino 6, because Sansevino 6, as I said, is I always wanted to build it up as a community. Mm-hmm. I wanted to build it as a community. I wanted to build it up thinking that today I'm doing sweaters. Tomorrow I could be doing books. The day after that I could be doing a dance performance. It's multifaceted, even in its base of fashion, but it's the only thing that I can think of for my future in my head, and there has to be a play it back.
Okay. Let me ask you this: what are you thinking as far as? Because I know you're kind of. I mean, you are a Renaissance man of the 21st century with the 21st. I will say with these different evolutions that you've had. I mean, it's like the word evolutions plural, I think, is perfect to describe you, and or revolutions. What. And I know one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I know you're also the fashion director of Perfect Magazine, so that's a whole other world.
Yeah, Milano fashion director, yeah.
And that's also like that touches on things I love, which is editorial and writing. But I know it's fashion. But, what do you? Before we touch on that, what are you thinking as far as in your head with your future? Or are you just a Gemini that's like?
Well, I am, but I'm doing a lot of different things, and I'm doing a lot of different things that and they're things that I care about. You know, they're yes, community projects. I teach a master's in knitwear.
Where?
And I teach a master's in well, the school is based in Rome. It's the Academy of Moda and Costume.
Oh, Moda and Costume. It's right near my house. I know exactly where it is. Oh.
Well, so they have the knitwear division is in Reggio Emilia. Modoteca Diana is the historic Miss Diana, who was the genius of Miss Diana is untold, and there has to be a book. But she was, one of the and still existed as one of the most creative and beautiful stories in knitwear. So she was the manufacturer for Kenzo and Margiela and Joseph and so many others. And so she's an archive there, but they also built the knitwear school within the quarters of Modoteca Diana, and so they asked me to be the tutor for the master's course in knitwear, which is great because I love teaching. I love working with young thinkers, young creatives, and I learn something every day with them as much as what I bring to them. So it's kind of an exchange. So I do that, and I do. I'm a part of a collective which is called WAMI. We Are Made in Italy. We Are Made in Italy. Was born from the existing off of the let's say the shift and realization after George Floyd, knowing that yes, that's happening over there, but we have to look within the space that we are, and it exists also in the system. And so we created, me with Stella Jean, who's also a designer,
She's based in Rome, yeah.
Exactly, Rome-based.
She's Caribbean?
Haitian.
She's Haitian, right.
And Michelle Ngomo, who is the founder and creator of Afro Fashion Week, Afro Fashion Association, which has existed in Milan for 6 years. So we got together and created this initiative. And this initiative initially, we wanted to create a cultural reform, specifically talking about BIPOC. So the existence of Black and brown creatives working in this space, not getting the same, not being offered the same opportunities as their counterparts. And so we had to question that. We had to say, where are we? Why does this exist? Why do we see a shift and a change in advertising in the models that you use that are completely diverse? But on the inside of these companies, they don't exist. They're not making their way into those spaces. So yes, it's a support structure. Yes, we're challenging the system, but we're not asking them for any favors. But what we are doing is insisting that we are here, we are Italian, we deserve the same opportunities, and if we cannot collaborate and align with you, then we're going to create them ourselves. And that's the essence of it. Every season, we introduce 5 new talents, and
Are you doing this at Afro Fashion Week, or are you doing
we
this?
do it along with Afro Fashion Week. So
Okay.
the 5 designers, which are called the Fab Five, for the last 3 seasons, they've been the first show that opens Milano Fashion Week through the Camera Nacional della Moda. They are multifaceted creatives that come from various continents and places, but the thing that we have in common is that they're all based here and they're all Italian manufactured.
I think I recently over the past year I've been speaking a lot with Ms. Suda Allison in African Fashion. How else can we see this?
It kicks off Afro Fashion Week, and that is those are still optics, But what we're instilling and what we want is to build these businesses. We want to build these careers. The opportunities that their counterparts that happen to be a few shades lighter than them are offered, they're not offered. So we have to. The mentorship for them is in the process, how to create a collection, how do you choose materials. How do you think about market? Who do you want to speak to? How do we create a business for you, or how do we create a great portfolio for you that's going to be able to get you or find you in a space that allows you to grow? The show process is beautiful and it's visual. That doesn't solve the problem. We don't want the optics to overshine the real problem that exists here. So, we're building from the inside out. The show that happens here is fantastic, but we want the Camera Nacional della Moda, we want Condé Nast and Vogue Italia to note. And in Vogue Italia, we got the cover of Vogue, for the first time with 5 women, 5 BIPOC women on the cover. It's unprecedented. It's never happened. So that's a check. It's not solved,
No.
There's so much more work to do.
Exactly.
That's a cover of a magazine.
2022.
That's a cover of a magazine, but we want, we want to think that,
It sounds to me like what you guys are creating is a little bit similar to how, like when you were talking about how, again, back to your foundation and what you were doing for yourself, and you did say you had your
mentor.
You did have a mentor.
Gordon.
Yeah, you're Gordon. But you've kind of created a bigger Gordon, And and not even, you're creating community.
Yeah.
And that just seems like this true line through everything you've been doing.
Well, that's what I said. When you asked me about what's the future of Sansovino 6, and it's difficult to answer that question because it's been very hard. I talked about this with my therapist and also my boyfriend, but it's very hard for me to say that what success means to me. And I find myself in a position where I'm extremely happy. I am contacted still for work. I have a place within this industry. I still find myself in corners where people don't know who I am, and I'm perfectly fine with that. What I want to do now is change the trajectory of where we are as a people for the future. I want to be able to start to understand and be able to shift and help others communicate and find their way into an industry that doesn't always or hasn't always welcomed them into it. And so that's a big task, and I'm not going to be able to solve it all, but a community can. And so with Whammy, and then that it has long legs because with Whammy, Michelle has already and together with us has already created Unseen Profiles. Unseen Profiles is essentially a database, of BIPOC individuals, not only working in fashion in the fashion sector, but we have chefs, we have house cleaners, we have architects, we have lawyers, and it is a community, but it's also a database that we can partner with companies in order for them to not have an excuse.
Exactly.
We don't want any excuses. So if you're not holding, you can't be inclusive and diverse on the outside if you're not inclusive, diverse on the inside. Because if you're saying that you are, then you're lying and you're covering up something, because it's very easy for you to put up a beautiful page and a beautiful window display with Black and brown people and trans women and it's easy for you to do that because you just pay them and you put them up. But in order to catch and question what's going on the outside, you need to be holding on the inside those who can assist and help you question those things. Otherwise, it's just never going to work. And it starts from the top. It starts from the top, and the power structures as they are all over the world, not just in Italy. We know who's holding the power. And in order to make change, those who are at the tip top that have been holding on to that power for a long time have to be willing to relinquish that power. And if they're not, the change is not going to happen.
Before we wrapped up our conversation, I wanted to know all about Perfect, Edward's gorgeous and independent fashion magazine. And I wanted to know his editorial perspective.
Perfect was born from a relationship with Katie Grant, and who's the director of the magazine and the founder of the magazine. And I know Katie Grant from the 90s because Katie Grant was the first stylist that I worked with at Bottega Veneta. We hadn't seen each other, and then we started talking on Instagram. We were able to obviously follow each other and know what was happening in each other's lives, and then we ended up meeting in Ibiza over last summer, 2 summers ago. At any rate, we met in Ibiza, and we started talking about doing something together. And I never worked in editorial as a journalist or working with a magazine. So at first I was like, what in the hell can I do here? At the same time, a part of my everyday job is editing and curiosity and working with youth and all of those things that obviously work well in the context of communicating through printed and digital magazine. And so she said to me, "You're the only one in Italy that can do this." And, Katie's a bully. And I said yes. Katie wanted to create a magazine based on an international conversation, youth conversation, questioning society, what exists within society, but also celebrating a fashion space. We love fashion, but we also love the conversation of what's happening around fashion. So it's an independent magazine. So we don't necessarily have the same pressures as a publication, which is it's propped up by anything else.
It's print as well as digital, correct? But it comes out twice a year, print?
It comes out when it's ready to come out. And we just launched number 2, and this is the first issue that I actually worked on. And it is very interesting because I'm essentially overseeing the Italian space. I'm the Milano fashion director. We have a fashion director in Paris. We have London. We have New York, and so I wanted to be able to bring to the conversation the things that I'm talking about, the things that I'm working on, and how that in context can work with the perfect community. And so the first story I did was on Milano talent, Milano youth talent, and Milano creatives. And so I did a casting of people that wouldn't necessarily get to have that conversation. It's easy to look on top and look at what everyone else is talking about and the same run-of-the-mill conversations, but we have to kind of like jump into those subcultures and understand what's happening around.
I read it. I read it because it was on the digital version.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I read it and I really liked what you were saying about like the pulse of what's going on in Milan right now.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that piece.
So things like that. I got a chance to talk to Kabi and what he's doing with TikTok and how that exploded and how he built that. So it allows me, it's still the right and left side of my brain because, in a way, these are things that I do every day in my workspace, but it's another community project and another outlet for conversations and questioning where we are today and where we want to go tomorrow.
Thank you to Edward, Sansovino 6, and We Are Made in Italy for making this episode happen. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Ciao Bella. The editor of Ciao Bella is Mastro. Production manager is Jenna Spray. If you're new to Ciao Bella, take a peek at ciaobella.co, our all-encompassing Italy-focused website, where you'll find insider insight on contemporary Italy, and sign up for our newsletter for new episodes and articles. Follow me on Instagram at Erica Firpo, and follow Ciao Bella on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. Leave us a rating or comment. Ciao, ciao!